very much, everybody. I've been let down badly by the gallery. It wasn't my introduction. My sisters. There's no dry ice. There's nothing happening here. I suppose, first of all, thanks very, very much for coming in on a day like today to an art gallery. As much as we all love that, but still, it's beautiful outside. So thanks for coming in, number one. Just want to thank Tom and Luke and Jess and everybody in Outset. I suppose number one for putting this on, but also for existing and supporting contemporary art particularly in the west of Ireland. I think it's really impressive what they do. I was so lucky to be offered a solo show here. I was thrilled to do it. I've done a few group shows with them, and spaces like this are quite rare. They're rare in Dublin. There's been a number of them closed in the last 12 months, like Hang Tough and Hen's Teeth and places like that. So I guess these sort of spaces are less and less available to artists. So to see this in the West in particular, I think is incredible, and support the gallery as best you can. So thanks Tom and Luke on board. So this is really a talk about this work, my background, how I make these artworks, what the sort of process is, maybe what is the practice thinking behind some of the pieces, why do they look like how they look, and really how I think about making art. So jump in along the way if you have any questions, because don't save them up to the end. It's kind of more fun if you have a discussion along the way. So I've got a PowerPoint here as well, which is really organised, so you can all have access to this if you want afterwards. So just a bit about my background, I guess, first of all. So I was born in Sligo, which sounds like a random fact to begin with, but it becomes relevant later. And my family moved to Dublin when I was very, very young. And we always spent a lot of time in Sligo, so every single summer, every single Christmas, right up to I was 22, I would say. I have been in sort of rural Sligo, and I'm very attached to that place, and it informs a lot of this work too. So I suppose growing up, it's always been in the back of my mind, and thinking about a place, a sense of place, is a big part of this stuff. So my background then, and what sort of formed me as an artist, I went to IADT in Dún Laoghaire. So I would have studied, initially I studied animation, which was way too much hard work, and I left that after 1 year. Animation then was primarily life drawing, nearly 4 days a week, I would say. It was really intensive life drawing, which I enjoyed, but it really was overwhelming. The idea of what would be ahead of you in a career in animation was pretty overwhelming. So I left animation and I went to fine art, which to the annoyance of my parents, who felt animation was a fair deal for getting a job after art college. But we broke that agreement and I went into fine art. I absolutely loved fine art, and I was in a year with some really, really interesting people in that year who would be sort of well known now, I guess, in Irish art making, like Mark Gary, Uni Young, Carper, people like that. They were all in 1 year together. It was a really mixed bunch of people. It was great. This was kind of 96, 97. After fine art, I didn't want to leave art college because it's such a bubble. It's such a beautiful sort of time in your life, and I really didn't want to leave the art college world. So I stayed on. I did a degree in design, visual communication, which basically set me up for what I do really 80% of the time, which is graphic design. So leaving college at that time, that was 97. So if you think about 97, what was happening, literally the internet was beginning, and there was a huge amount of opportunities for people coming out of the art colleges at that moment to get actual employment, because before that you would torture yourself thinking about how was I going to earn money in a creative career. Obviously you could go into education and things like that, but if you didn't want to do that, or maybe you weren't, didn't have the aptitude for that, the internet created an incredible amount of opportunities for design and multimedia and everything at that moment. So when I came out, I got a job straight away in ad agencies, which was really exciting, a really kind of wild time in the internet. It was the very early days of the internet, so it was very DIY, it was very sort of, take fine art thinking and bring that into design. Very exciting time, so quite intoxicating, and I just fell in love with that world, which is the agencies world, and I just worked through agencies in Dublin then, and then some stints abroad as well, in Luxembourg, in Helsinki for a while, and Berlin and London. And that's a very addictive sort of world to be in. You're exposed to so many types of commercial projects, and you bring that thinking then into your own work as a fine artist when you get time to do that. Now at that time I didn't have any time to do fine art work. I was completely absorbed in the sort of creative industries, let's say. So it was graphic design, it was motion design, it was editing, it was storyboard artist, anything was possible at that time, and I just worked through all that. So that's a great education in itself, coming out of college. And that work luckily never ended, it kept going. And then ultimately in 2010 I started an independent agency, having worked for loads of agencies with another guy. It's called Cuba, and it's been pretty successful. It's still going, that's what I do 80% of the time. And we're based in Dublin and Berlin. So some of this work is actually informed by some of the projects we do. And this one in particular, I'll show you an example of it later. So that's very much my background. That's kind of who I am. So I have that fine art background, but predominantly I'm a graphic designer, and now I'm creative director for Cuba. So that's kind of my background. So that informs really all my thinking now. Apart from that, I've been involved in music and bands over the years as well, and music making is a part of what I do, but not really relevant as such today. So this practice, I suppose, that produces these pieces is kind of, it's a real eye-opener for me, because it's not, what they look like is not what I intended them to look like at the beginning at all. And even the fact that they're relief pieces or sort of hybrid sculptures is not what I had planned at the beginning. So my practice is really around the idea that I bring a sort of a design thinking to art making. So I want to set out, nearly like getting a brief, I want to set out a set of restrictions and parameters around the rules about, how I make objects. So those are a fixed set of rules, but they need to be reasonably flexible, but they are quite fixed. So everything from colour to form, the material, the composition is all very planned and has nearly a brand guidelines or design library approach to them. So some of the sort of influential work that would inform my thinking about these would be something like it's quite popular on Instagram. It's the Munich 1972 Olympics developed a really, really powerful brand guidelines, and they apply that to every single thing about the Olympics. So from signage to wayfinding to where the athletes were staying. It's beautiful stuff. It's a beautiful set of graphic design elements. So for graphic design nerds, you really would eat it up. And I'll link to all this stuff afterwards, but that comes into this thinking as well. So you've got the rules around maybe all these motifs, because you see they repeat quite a bit, or they're distorted, or they're slightly amended. And then colour. So colour is really, really powerful in these, and the colour ended up being quite limited, because as they became wood pieces, I had to think about how I was making them in terms of the finish. So I wanted a kind of an industrial finish to them, that there's no real brushwork or anything like that. So that's spray paint, and then if you're using spray paint, you have to think about solvents and how messy they are. So I ended up using water-based spray paint, which is a limited colour palette, because the people who make that, the good stuff, is a limited palette. So that was the palette then, so there are the rules. So that fed into the kind of design system that makes them. So you can only use X amount of colours. So you've got a design library of shapes and motifs, a colour system, and then you've got, I suppose, permission then to play with them. So there's one piece up there which is called Inscape, and it's that interactive piece, and that's the idea that you can sort of play around with these elements when you get them, and then I suppose make compositions, and then think about how they work against each other. So that's how these emerge. And then I suppose there's meaning then in all these pieces. So I mentioned earlier my connection to Sligo. So what you're looking at really in all these motifs, particularly this is probably a good one, there's two sets of motifs basically. This set, which are fields, so that's a field system, a small farm in Sligo. So using sort of mapping and ordnance survey maps, I could go back over quite a long period of time to trace these fields' shapes. Have they evolved over the years? Have the boundaries changed? Things like that. These were just things that interested me around the idea of psychogeography and moving through fields. As a kid, you would have different feelings in certain fields. If you're kind of open to that, if you sort of think about that. So it's quite esoteric and maybe very personal, but I did, and I was always fascinated listening to people from the area talk about field names and histories behind certain fields. That field is the lower field, that's the upper field, that's the whatever field, there's a reason behind that. I just found all that fascinating. So the fields became these graphic shapes, which are different strokes to different thickness, and they just became interesting compositional elements. So for me, there's a logic behind them, there's a set of rules, and they appear in different pieces around here to different sort of varying degrees. So you've got the field system as one set of motifs, and then the other is around the idea of geology and I suppose what's underneath the fields, which is these kind of more organic shapes that you see. So that's around the idea that in the middle of one of the fields there was a turlock, a disappearing lock, which I always found fascinating as a kid. This is pre-mobile phones or anything, so you were turfed out the door to go down the fields and amuse yourself as a kid. So imagination was huge. And I would go into these fields, and particularly the turlock, I couldn't really get my head around the idea. It was there some days, it wasn't there other days, which was based on everything from tides to weather conditions to other geological things that were going on. But I didn't know at the time, so there's a sense of magic about it. And I measured and mapped the footprint of the turlock, which changes every time. So when you start to put that on top of each other, you can see there's different sort of shapes that represent that. I found that interesting too. So I had these two sets of motifs to work with, and then really, like any graphic design project, you've got these elements to work with, and you can start to pull them together and do different things with them. And then you have repeating elements, so some of those pieces that look like waveforms or sort of repeated and slightly moved maps are based on other sort of rural agricultural day-to-day events, like the movement of cattle through a field on a particular route, or a hare running through a field, things like that. Again, very personal, and things that I would have mapped out and sort of created another set of objects based on that. So that's the sort of building blocks of all this stuff, and that's what they are. But as I talk about them and sometimes sell one or two of them, and you talk to the person about why they bought them, all that goes out the window completely. Because like I was saying to Luke earlier, your own meanings and in abstract art and why you made the piece, there's no way anybody could draw that from looking at one of those. There's no way he knew that was a small farm in Screen in Sligo, exploded view on top of each other. It just looks like an interesting object, and there's some story behind it. So it was that idea of intention versus process, and how the process, you end up with something maybe that you didn't think you would sort of design at the beginning. which then became very amusing and satisfying to myself as I was making them. So ultimately I make them because I want to see what they're going to look like, and I enjoy making them. And in my work life, which is very commercial design work, I found a way to make space, I suppose, in the working week, which is 1 day a week, to do this stuff 100% of the time, which is great. I'm very lucky that I've got to that place. But again, that's another parameter, because like anybody making anything creative, you give yourself 100 reasons not to make it, or you think about it too much, or you procrastinate about it. So in the beginning I started to think I needed a wet studio, I needed this luxurious area to work in, everybody get out of my way, I need lots of time to think about this, but that's not reality. And we have 2 young kids, and it's just not the way life works, and then you end up not making the stuff, which is very frustrating. So that was another parameter, which meant that the work had to begin on the laptop in design programs like Illustrator, Photoshop, because you can grab 30 minutes here and there, or an hour sometimes, or you're traveling, so you could create the work here, and then you have to think about how you're going to produce it. I wanted them to look like paintings, I wanted them to look like big, abstract, impressive paintings, but I couldn't make that work from a time perspective or facilities or anything like that. So I started thinking about how could I create them. That brought me to thinking about laser cutting, CNC routers, things like that, and then wood, and then mimicking paintings basically. So they're kind of like hybrid sculptures that are, they want to be paintings, but they're not paintings, and they're sort of using the visual language of an abstract painting, but they're more like a relief piece, like a sculpture. And then when you arrive at that, you look at who else is doing stuff like that. So I ended up seeing, certain artists that do similar things. Emily Forgot is a British designer. She's incredible, and she does these kind of similar assemblages. They're much smaller, and she's a big influence on this stuff. She's also a designer and works in commercial design work, but then creates time to make stuff like this too. So that was another sort of parameter or set of rules to work within, which was you couldn't have the luxury of doing big canvas-based art, abstract pieces, because it had to work in a particular way. So that's the kind of process that makes these. So when I get these shapes back, they're raw wood. I have to kind of woodwork them to a degree, priming, sanding, and then obviously painting them. But the painting is very industrial. There's no sort of sign of the artist's hand in it. It's just flat colour, which I like. And then you have other elements come in because of how they're made, like these little circles that are on them. They're basically disguising build marks and screws and wood glue and things like that are assembling them. But they start to become part of the aesthetic of it. And that's the kind of process. So that's how they kind of emerge at the end. So that's a kind of an overview of it, really. I don't know, does anybody have any questions about that so far?
When you use the water-based spray paint, do you still have to use a gas mask for particle elimination and so on?
No, maybe I should, but it feels like I don't need to. I certainly do with the solvents.
Because the elementary, if you can smell it, you're eating it,
Yeah, I can kind of smell it. I can't really smell it. It seems okay.
Is that a relatively new introduction to that? Is that made by, what's the name?
MCN.
Are they the ones in Montana can?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They have a good library of colours. And it's great, the water-based stuff is really, really great to work with. Yeah.
And is it from that shop in Temple Bar?
Yeah, I got a load from that, a load off them, but they tend to replace the colours sometimes without telling you. So we don't have Cosmos Violet, we're going to give you something else. It's the same, trust us. It's not the same. There's another rule broken in the process. But yeah, you can get them there.
How much of the assembly is pre-planned, or does it happen? Was that designed that way first?
That was very designed that way. but then Tom and Luke dropped it and it fell, and it fell apart and we had to reassemble it. That's true, by the way. We tried to hang it with fish wire, and the fishing shop said, there's absolutely no way that'll break. Yeah, and it broke within what, maybe 15 seconds?
Second time in 10 minutes.
Can I ask you what's going on with this last piece here?
Yeah, so this is one I was going to highlight to talk about. So this is probably a good example of, you know, crossover between a commercial design project and then into the sort of art making. So this one's called Fear of Painting, and it's back to the idea that I wanted to make abstract paintings, but either I was too intimidated to make them or I couldn't find the space and time to make them. So that's what it's called. It's very much based on the field system motifs. So, but they have been fractured and broken. So these are the sort of true shapes of the field. So if you look at that red one at the bottom, that's literally the shape of the field. You could go into that and you'd probably even recognize it looking around like its boundaries. But these ones are the exact same field system, but they've been broken up and sort of overlaid and fractured. The original intention with this was I wanted to make a painting that would be like a Franz Klein painting. I'm a huge fan of his painting, and of course it doesn't end up like that. And I think a lot of people will take that approach. You know, you're influenced by something and you kind of want to produce something that looks like that or feels like that. But it began to change along the way. So a couple of pictures here. So it kind of started as these little experiments here, which were based on a painting I did do on canvas, so on kind of loose canvas, which was this. So that was that's a huge painting. That's probably, I don't know, that's probably 15 foot tall, and that's in our design studio just off Camden Street in Dublin. So downstairs I'm lucky enough that I can use that as a studio, because office space in Dublin, nobody was using offices anymore. So our landlord is stuck and he's got this big space downstairs which you couldn't design it better if you wanted to imagine your perfect art studio. Like it's an industrial space like this, like it literally looks like a gallery and it's unused, so I get to use that, so I'm thrilled with that. So you can hang big things like this. This is done at night when no one was there, so I kind of like the idea that you have this commercial work happening during the day and then this kind of elves working at night doing these little subversive art projects at night. So this was originally a painting, and you can kind of see similarities in it there, but what I did then is I do like to rework things, resample things and then change it and maybe do a print of it, and you can see in the back there's these paste-ups that are on the wall that are based on that. And then you've got this, which is, so I mentioned earlier we do a lot of work in Berlin. So this is a client of ours in Berlin. They're called Holoplot. And what that is that's a speaker array, a speaker system. And maybe 3 years ago we started working with them, and they're fascinating. They have this kind of product, which is the speaker system, but it allows them to manipulate sound in a room. So they can send a parcel of sound, as they describe it, sort of anywhere in this room. So you could hear it, but you wouldn't hear it. And you'd hear it nearly in your ear, like it was whispering to you. And then they can change the coordinates of that and it goes to your other ear. But you literally feels like somebody's walking around you. So all that's happening with this, which is really impressive. And you're standing there and they're doing a test, and you're conscious of these German scientists behind the board saying, stand here, listen to this. So it was a bit unnerving. But I was fascinated by the object itself. I just thought, as a design thing, it's beautiful. Like, it's kind of brutalist and it's a bit scary looking, but it's really impressive to stand in front of it. It's bigger than that, like it's really impressive. But anyway, we worked with them for a couple of years, and I've always been fascinated with this thing. So that kind of influenced the look and feel a bit of that. And they, last year, did, you remember the Sphere in Las Vegas with U2, and that whole thing that they did there? So the sphere, there's two aspects to the sphere. One is obviously the visual, that whole thing everybody saw that you two did, which was incredible, whatever you think of the band, but like it was very awe-inspiring. And the other aspect of the sphere is the audio. And Holoplot do the audio for the whole of the sphere. So this product is part of that experience. So for us as a design agency, they're a great client to have and to be part of that whole thing. But for me, I was kind of half not listening to them, kept staring at the thing, and then started to think about how I could bring it into a piece of an art making process. So that's kind of the background to that one.
Were you not tempted to make a sound installation with the show?
Yeah, I mean, sound is kind of in it, in the repetition. And like, so I mentioned I play in bands and things. So what I play is the drums, so it's very much about rhythm. So there's a lot of sort of rhythm and repetition in some of these pieces that for me is about music making and how I think about that. So that comes into the pieces that way. I didn't think about doing an actual audio piece. It would be fun to do though.
There's a piece that just we already mentioned, one picture set by Arthur Dove, the American painter, called Foghorns, and it's three large concentric circles of colour that just seem to get bigger as it goes out. It's almost like a visual representation. And you mentioned the music, I can see certain, obviously, conservation. Yeah, he did a lot of work based around the coast of America. So it's somewhat overlooked.
Lovely, yeah.
But it was a lovely painting. But yeah, it's a sound installation based on the kind of technology that you're talking about, which is obviously very high end. Bang & Olufsen do some of their speaker systems are like hexagon shapes and you can arrange them in different ways.
All those objects are beautiful.
They're beautiful objects as well.
Yes.
Very inside.
Well, I don't have U2's budget, so I could.
I can see what they could do with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I have a technical question?
Go for it, yeah.
Let's imagine I had €3,000 to buy the artwork,
Yeah.
which I don't. But there are some elements of it which are in this piece. They are three-dimensional. They could be disassembled and brought to my flat.
Yeah.
But I see that there are some parts of the artwork which are painted on the wall.
Yes.
So I imagine you would come to my house and paint this stuff there.
Well, you'd have to get Tom as well, because that was a collaboration. So I came down here hanging this with the lads, and then part of the plan was I was going to do this gestural, free-form thing on the wall, which I did, and I was shitting myself doing it because it looked so perfectly hung and it was just there. So I did that, and I was like drawn out, and I was quite happy with the results. But Tom then suggested that he would add some bits and take it a little bit further, which I really like the idea of that. I just like the idea of the collaboration of it and not to be too precious about it. So he did that. He added some elements there as well, and I think it really helped it. So I like the idea that if somebody did buy it, that you would actually go to their house and do something like that.
And one day Tuesday is the
Yeah, depends on Tom's schedule.
But let's imagine in 100 years the Tate wants to exhibit it and they are asking my ears, can we have this artwork? Then who would create the elements on the wall at Tate?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's. I like the idea that there's a set of instructions to make one of these, and if you actually followed them, you could, as well as I have made them, you could make them. And I do like that approach to art making as well, the kind of removal of the artist's hand out of it, like, so the width sort of idea of a set of instructions to create something on a wall, which is quite conceptual, and sort of, I like that idea. So I think you could probably include that element in this. There would be instructions to make the big black piece. The prints would be available. You'd purchase the print, and then you'd have to print it a certain way, and then you have an element to play in it that you have to do the gestural drawing on the wall, and whatever you do works. There's no wrong or right way to do it.
So in a certain sense, the artwork is not the object there, but your instructions and how to recreate it.
Instruction-based art. And you saw that with Damien Hirst. last month on the shark, and everyone getting annoyed about when it was created and when. His argument was, the artwork is the idea, not the execution of it, because they're replacing those sharks because they start to deteriorate. So you can make that argument. I mean, it's a lovely art college conversation, isn't it? Yeah, go ahead.
Could you talk about some of the field names that you find interesting and kind of the story behind it?
Yeah, like they all have bizarre names. You know, there's a great project, I think it's called the Mead Field Project, and I think it was I think it emerged out of Galway as this kind of survey of field names, and they're bizarre, the names, you know, and they're just a survey of all around the country different field names that exist in these small farms, because everybody has folk memories of them, or a lot of people in Ireland are either one generation from a small farm or certainly have other people that are in their family, so you'd be familiar with it. I just love the stories behind those fields names and what goes on in them. Certainly in this field system you had that disappearing loch. You also had another field that's called the Trench, which just sounds ominous because it was literally a small little trench they dug to put water in to feed cattle. And then you had another field that had a massive stone, like a Neolithic stone, and then another field had a similar stone, and the story was there was a secret tunnel between the two stones. So for me that was fascinating. So I'd have dreams about levitating rocks and then being able to get into the tunnel system underneath. So all that, I love all that magical thinking, all that kind of what's going on beneath the surface. There's a great book called Underland, which I read in the last 12 months, which touches on a lot of these topics as well, what happens under the ground and from a geological perspective. So, but again, that's all sort of personal thinking. You'd never read that from these really.
Following on from that question,
Yeah.
how do you come up with the names for your pieces? Like I can see Ox Trench there, so I can kind of guess, but
Yeah.
some of them are less obvious, like Persephone and Plankton.
So Persephone that's a Greek goddess, but it's also the colour from that palette of that particular green. So that's where that comes from. And then some of them are music based, named after a particular band or a song.
Okay.
There's one down there called Twin Infinitives, which I thought sounded really cool. But it's a song by, or it's an album by the band Royal Trucks. They're kind of an experimental band in the 90s. So a lot of that stuff for me is just a little private in joke that I bring into the titles.
What is the is it laser cut?
So the small ones down there. So Tom was keen as part of this show, like to not just do the big pieces. I wanted to do these at scale because I hadn't done them big before. But Tom was keen to do, say, 8 very, very small ones, kind of micro pieces that would be more affordable. People could actually buy them and live with them. You know, they're small enough. So when you go at that scale, you really have to use a laser cutter to do that because it's so precise. But these bigger ones, this is cut with an industrial CNC router. Out on the Nace Road, there's kind of a big supplier out there that does sort of big scale industrial projects and sort of commercial projects. But you can get them to do weird stuff like this sometimes as well. They like doing the stuff that is a bit odd. So some of it is router cut, and then some of it is hand cut that are more straightforward shapes with a jigsaw. It's all on birch wood as well, which it's just nice wood to work with because it takes the paint really well. If you get the right thickness, so this is all 6mm thick, it doesn't tend to bend, but it's still flexible. So if you get it too thin, it gets too wobbly and kind of doesn't hold its shape. There was a birchwood crisis 12 months ago with the war in Ukraine. A lot of birchwood comes from Russia, and you couldn't actually get your hands on it for a while. So I had to buy 20 sheets of birchwood at the last minute before it all went off the market, basically. So tons of birchwood in the studio. Great. You're all probably trying to get in the sun. Don't blame me. Any other questions before we wrap up? Good. Well, look, thanks for for your time. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Thank you.